The past is filled with darkness, mystery, and things that defy explanation. We're drawn to these stories, not to be spooked, but to understand what they reveal about us.
But sometimes the truth is weirder and creepier than fiction.
This is Down the Rabbit Hole, Weird History. I'm Rose Smith.
And I'm Jacob Wesson.
Join us as we explore the unsettling moments when human behavior pushes the boundaries of belief.
Let's dive in.
We like to think of history as a steady climb toward order, but there are moments where the ladder breaks and we see exactly how thin the floor really is. In the winter of 897, the floor didn't just break, it vanished. We are looking at a moment where the highest spiritual office on the planet decided that death was no longer an excuse for silence. It is called the Cadaver Synod, and while the name sounds like a Gothic horror story, the reality was a very calculated, very desperate legal maneuver performed on a rotting body.
I've heard the name, but I always assumed it was one of those historical exaggerations, like a metaphor that got out of hand over 1,000 years. You're telling me there was an actual physical trial with a judge and a defendant who had been buried for 9 months?
It was as physical as it gets. Pope Stephen VI ordered the body of his predecessor, Formosus, to be exhumed. This wasn't a private viewing or a secret desecration. This was a formal, liturgical, and legal proceeding. They took the corpse, which had been decaying in a tomb for nearly a year, and they dressed it. They put the papal vestments on it, the heavy silks, the pallium, the ornate robes that represent the weight of God's authority on earth. They sat him on a throne in the Basilica of San Giovanni in Laterano.
Hold on, the smell alone. If we're talking about 9 months in a crypt in the Roman climate, the physics of that room don't work. How does a group of high-ranking officials sit in a room with a decomposing body and pretend a trial is happening?
That's the first layer of the why. You have to understand the sensory reality of the 9th century. This wasn't a sterile world. Rome was a city of ruins, of open sewers, of heavy incense used to mask the scent of mortality. But more than that, the smell was the point. The stench was a manifestation of the sin they were trying to purge. By bringing that decay into the sacred space of the basilica, Stephen VI was making the internal state of the church visible. He wanted the court to breathe in the rot of his predecessor. He wanted them to feel the physical corruption. It wasn't an obstacle, it was the evidence.
But the logistics of it, it's absurd. If you're sitting there as a priest or a scribe, and you're watching a man in a tiara scream at a corpse that is literally falling apart in front of you, at what point does someone stand up and say, this is a break from reality? Why didn't the system's check and balance kick in?
Because the system was the one holding the shovel. To understand why no one stopped it, you have to look at what Rome was in 897. This wasn't the glorious Roman Empire, and it wasn't the polished Renaissance Vatican. This was a dark age in the most literal sense. The city was a ghost of itself, populated by perhaps 30,000 people living inside walls built for 1 million. The papacy had become a local prize for feuding Italian families, specifically the House of Spoleto. They viewed the Bishop of Rome not as a global spiritual leader, but as a local landlord with a direct line to the divine. If you controlled the Pope, you controlled the legal narrative of the peninsula. Formosus had crossed the Spoletos. He had invited the Carolingians in to take power. When he died, the Spoletos didn't just want him gone, they wanted him erased from the legal record.
So it wasn't just madness, it was a legal loophole?
Exactly. If Formosus died a pope in good standing, his acts remained valid. His ordinations, his treaties, his appointments, they all stood. But if he could be proven to be an unlawful pope, then every single thing he did during his reign became null and void. The trial was a giant undo button. By convicting a dead man of perjury and violating canon law, Stephen VI could effectively reset the chessboard. It's the ultimate gaslighting. They weren't just killing a man. They were trying to murder the time he spent on the throne.
But there was a defense, right? You mentioned a deacon.
Yes, this is perhaps the most unsettling part of the choreography. A young deacon was appointed to stand beside the throne. His job was to act as the voice of Formosus. When the accusations were read out, when Stephen VI stepped forward and shouted, "Why did you, in your ambition, usurp the see of Rome?" the deacon would cower. He would offer excuses or remain silent. Imagine the psychological toll on that young man. He is staring at a face that has been partially reclaimed by the earth, hearing the most powerful man in his world scream at a skull, and he has to find a way to inhabit that silence. He is the bridge between the living's rage and the dead's indifference.
It feels like a glitch in how humans process power. We usually stop at the grave. We have this unspoken rule that once you're dead, the person is gone and only the legacy remains. Stephen VI was refusing to accept that transition. He was dragging the person back into the world of the living so he could punish the legacy.
It's a refusal to let the dead rest until they've paid the bill. Think about the room itself. The Basilica of San Giovanni is massive, echoing. The lighting would have been flickering oil lamps. You have the gold of the vestments clashing with the gray, leathery skin of the defendant. It wasn't a trial of a person. It was a trial of a symbol. They were trying to break the power of the office by showing that the office could be occupied by a monster, and that they had the power to strip that sanctity away, even after the soul had departed.
And no one in the congregation, no other bishop thought, if we do this to him, what happens when we die? That's the part I can't wrap my head around. It's a precedent that destroys everyone's safety.
Fear is a powerful anesthetic for logic. If you were in that room, you knew that if you spoke up, you might be the next one on the throne, or the next one in the river. The factionalism was so raw that people were willing to burn down the house just to see their enemy's furniture turn to ash. They weren't thinking about the next century, they were thinking about the next hour. And in that hour, the dead man was the enemy. We'll be right back with part 2.
Now would be a good time to hit those like and follow buttons as well as leave a comment.
We need your help to continue bringing you stories like this one.
Now let's get back to part 2.
There is a point in every cycle of violence where the actors stop being human and start being mechanisms of pure destruction. As the trial of Formosus reached its peak, the legal veneer finally dissolved. They didn't just find him guilty, they executed the sentence on a body that had already been claimed by nature.
How do you execute a dead man? If the goal was to void his acts, you just sign a paper, right? Why the physical escalation?
Because symbols require blood, even if it's dried. Once the verdict was read, declaring Formosus an intruder and his papacy a sham, they stripped him. They tore the sacred vestments off the body, which, considering the state of decay, would have been a gruesome, tactile process. They took the body down from the throne. Then came the specific, ritualized mutilation. They cut off the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he used for the blessing.
The blessing fingers. That's incredibly specific. It's like they were surgically removing his ability to have ever been a pope.
It was a forensic strike on his identity. By removing the fingers of the blessing, they were saying that every prayer he muttered and every person he consecrated was invalid because the physical instrument of that grace was corrupt. It's a terrifying way to look at the human body, as a tool that can be decommissioned like a broken machine. But they didn't stop there. They dragged the body through the streets of Rome.
Through the streets? In front of the public?
Yes, this wasn't a secret. The Roman populace was part of the theater. They watched this corpse, once their holy father, being dragged through the dust. Eventually, it was tossed into the Tiber River. The river is a recurring theme in Roman history. It's where you put things you want the sea to swallow, things you want God to forget. But the river has a way of refusing the gifts it's given.
You're saying he didn't stay down?
He didn't. A few days later, a monk pulled the body from the reeds, and this is where the glitch in the narrative starts to shift. The people of Rome, who had watched the trial with a mix of terror and apathy, suddenly began to hear rumors. They heard that the body of Formosus was performing miracles, that when he was pulled from the water, the icons in the church bowed to him. The psychological weight of what they had done started to press back against them.
So the backlash was as fast as the trial?
Faster. Within months, the city turned. Stephen VI, the man who orchestrated the whole thing, was stripped of his power, imprisoned, and strangled to death in his cell. The Cadaver Synod didn't stabilize the Spolito's power. It acted as a lightning rod for every bit of resentment in the city. When you violate the dead to that degree, you lose the moral high ground required to lead the living. You've shown everyone that nothing is sacred, and if nothing is sacred, then you aren't sacred either.
It feels like a total collapse of the papal myth. If the Pope can be dug up and tried, then the office isn't a divine appointment, it's just a chair. Stephen VI proved that the king was not only naked, but that the king was just meat and bone.
That's the long-term wreckage. The papacy spent the next 100 years in what historians call the Saeculum Obscurum, the dark age of the papacy. It became a revolving door of murders, depositions, and scandals. The Cadaver Synod was the moment the prestige of the office hit the floor and shattered. It took centuries to glue those pieces back together, and the cracks never really went away.
What happens to Formosus? After the river, after the miracles, does he get any peace?
He does. A succeeding pope, Theodore II, held another synod, this one to annul the Cadaver Synod. He had the body retrieved again, reclothed in the vestments, and reinterred in St. Peter's with full honors. There's a story that as they put him back in his tomb, the statues of the saints whispered a welcome. It's a poetic end to a grotesque story, but it doesn't erase what happened.
It's the how that stays with me, how a group of educated, powerful men could convince themselves that putting a corpse on a chair was a solution to a political problem. It shows how easily we can use logic to justify something that is fundamentally insane.
We have a remarkable capacity to treat the absurd as the necessary when we're afraid. The Cadaver Synod wasn't a moment of mass madness. It was a moment of mass desperation. They were trying to control the uncontrollable, the past. They wanted to edit history with a shovel and a pair of shears. But history is heavier than a corpse, and it's much harder to bury.
It's a reminder that the institutions we think are solid are only as stable as the people running them. When the people decide to ignore the basic dignity of the dead, the whole structure starts to rot from the inside out.
It remains one of the strangest glitches in our record, a moment where the veil between the spiritual and the visceral was torn away, leaving us with the image of a dead man on a throne surrounded by men who had forgotten what it meant to be alive. It's a story that we try to push into the margins of history books, but it sits there, waiting, reminding us of what happens when politics consumes the soul. Thank you for joining us in the rabbit hole today.
If you've got a story that defies explanation or just want to tell us how much this episode affected you, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as Spotify and YouTube.
Down the Rabbit Hole, Weird History is brought to you by gxworks.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the parts of history most people would rather forget.
Until then, keep questioning what you know. Here is what we do know. The truth is always waiting just below the surface.
Be sure to like, share, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff to hear more episodes. Leave a comment to let us know what you thought and what you'd like to hear in the future. And we'll see you in the hole.